by Newcastle County government.
When the COVID pandemic hit full force in March 2020, virtually every school in the country closed down. Hi, I'm Kerwin Gaines, and welcome to The Agenda. Classroom learning was replaced with a quickly put together remote system as students began homeschooling. Schools stayed closed for a full 18 months, opening again this fall. Schools opened, yet many students have not returned. In August, the New York Times, in conjunction with Stanford University, published an analysis estimating that 1 million kids were missing from enrollment, many of them from the most vulnerable low-income neighborhoods. Parents have left the public school system for a variety of reasons. Some like the virtual options. Others are still fearful of returning their students to in-person learning. The highest concentration is in kindergarten. The Times report looked at 70,000 public schools across the nation. Schools lost nearly 20% of the kindergartners expected to enroll. Many high schoolers who got jobs during the pandemic also did not return. Has enrollment rebounded? The stakes are high. Each district had to submit enrollment figures by September 30th, the cutoff date for state funding. The funding is determined by the student count of each district. So if the student is not accounted for, the district misses out on the funding, even if the child shows up at a later date. Now we're going to sit down with Dr. Deirda Aikins Joyner, Deputy Superintendent of the Christina School District, and Glasgow High School Principal Harold Butch Ingram, to give us insight on this issue in Delaware. All school districts, just not Christina, are having a difficult time. September 30th was the day that was necessary for the final count, so to speak, for the students. And where does Christina stand with that?
Well, when you say where we stand, it's important to note that that's the day that we take what we call the snapshot for the entire year. So that's where we count every student that we call sort of butts in seats, those who have shown up, those who have work that can prove that they have shown up for that time. And so obviously we get to count them for funding purposes. So it means two things for us, and especially during this pandemic. One, it means how many kids did we recover? How many kids did we find? How many kids are with us after this critical time? Secondly, it means, did our numbers go up? Did they go down? And what do we need to do about that? And then thirdly, obviously, we look at it from a funding standpoint. Obviously, we get monies for the students we get to count, and so therefore we get to plan operations.
So let me ask the obvious question. What was the delta difference between 2020 and now?
So we won't know that for a few days.
Okay.
Schools have until the close of business today, September 30th, to get all that count completed. It'll be reviewed. It'll be
How's it looking?
How's it looking?
How's it looking thus far?
Because Christina added a virtual academy, it's looking better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So boots on the ground, Mr. Ingram, in your school, what are we doing to ensure that kids are coming to school or are re-engaging?
Re-engaging in school. I'm glad that you asked that question, because that was the million-dollar question, right? Students have been not necessarily in our presence for the last 18 months or so. So what we've done is we have this campaign of connections and relationships. So when students actually are in front of myself and our staff, what we do is we make it a point to really just figure out how they're doing, what's going on in their lives. We talk to them. We have conversations that would allow us an opportunity to know where they're coming from so that we can better support them. So it's been challenging, the first month or so, but I think that we're in a very good place, and ultimately that's going to allow us an opportunity to keep the students there and re-engage them into the schools.
So you're dealt with also a big hand in regards to COVID, right? So ensuring that the students are vaccinated. Not all of the students, all of your students are eligible. Not all of your students are eligible. Since you encompass the district, I believe it's anyone 11 and under just can't have it, right? So for the students that are eligible for the vaccine, is that a determining factor on whether or not they're coming back? Do they not feel safe in the school building due to health, or is that a big factor?
So in our case, the great news is, we talked about the plus delta. For us, we are up. Okay. So our students are coming back at a much higher rate than they have previously. So that's a great accomplishment for us, and I attribute that to the staff and their engagement and their parent phone calls and all those things to try to get students involved. So I don't know that the shot necessarily has deterred them one way or the other. There are just some families that just don't feel comfortable sending their students back to school, but we've made every effort to reach out to them, to go visit them, to call them with the district support as well as the support at the school level to be able to re-engage them and get them back in the schools.
I was talking to one school administrator that dealt with high school students, and he brought it to my attention that some of the students that did not come back is because they just went to work. They went to work and they stayed at work. And you guys understand that there's some tough zip codes here in the state, right? And Christina encompasses most of those hard zip codes here in the state. So a lot of those students that have less fortunate upbringings need the jobs to sustain their families, and they do that. So how are we working to re-engage those students that, although you are up, I'm sure some of those students just didn't come back. So what are we doing to help bring them back?
Well, a couple of things I'll speak to. Also, the fact that you talked about whether or not the vaccination played a role. I would just mention that that's why the virtual academy was so important, because those who didn't feel like coming back.
What is the virtual academy?
It is an opportunity to engage with your teacher synchronously or via a computer, laptop, the way we all did it, right, the last 18 months. Those that found that helpful, we created an academy.
So they can stay in that format?
Correct. Okay. From home. We dedicated staff to the virtual academy. So we have over 120, maybe around 90 high school students that are enrolled in the virtual academy. So I just wanted to name that because if the vaccination was a concern, we had a virtual academy option
to do that.
Correct.
Right. So you haven't graduated anyone from the virtual academy yet. This is kind of the first year, kind of getting it up and running. And what has been the feel from the parents in regards to that?
The feel has been positive. Obviously, parents chose it for reasons that obviously they didn't want to be in the building or face-to-face posed a concern for them. So the reception is positive. We will certainly get a gauge on the attendance after the September 30th count to make sure that they not only enrolled but did attend. So.
And just to add to that, the only, not concern, but the only question was, am I going to graduate from Glasgow High School?
Right.
So they're excited about the fact that they will be graduating from the school of their choice. So that was important for them as well, being a part of the virtual academy.
So for me, I'll tell you what one of my concerns are, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers that are watching have concerns, is that it almost seems like there was like they took a gap year. I understand that no one was expecting this type of pandemic to occur, right? Honestly, we weren't prepared, right? We had to stand up a virtual environment in a minimal amount of time. And not only did we have to stand it up, but it had to be efficient. And not only did the students have to understand it, the teachers had to understand it. And then the parents had to understand it. And all three of us somehow had to work together for an indefinite amount of times because we just didn't know how long it was going to last. I know that I was praying for it to end fairly soon. But a lot of parents didn't. So my concern as an employer here in the state is that, what about that knowledge gap, right? So if I'm hiring these 18-year-olds that are going to graduate this year, they took a year and a half off, it seems like. I know that that's generalizing and assuming, and I don't want to say that and take away from the efforts that your teachers have put forward. I don't want to say that, but I think it's a real concern that a lot of people have. What assurances do I have that the quality of education that was given during that period was the same quality of education that was given prior to? And what type of, checks and balances are we doing to ensure that that's happening, okay? So we do the standardized testing a few times per year, and you guys could speak to that all day, I'm sure. But what other barometer are we using to ensure that that gap year is being filled in, that these kids are catching back up?
So our teaching and learning department, which is the department I oversee, district office, from district office down to those and the schools, those instructional leaders in the schools, we've been examining this since day one. So we've been working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that not only the learning that took place was relevant, was productive, was aligned to the standards. We know we had to truncate it. We're online. Hours were cut short. Kids needed a break. Teachers needed a break. Like, everybody's been working so hard. So we have this sort of like a triangle, I guess I would describe it as, when we talk about multi-tiered systems of support. And so you think about kids at the tip of the triangle needing additional support. We've chosen to invert that triangle now and assume that everybody needs support. So what we're applying, or that lens we're using now, is we're not waiting till October to say, okay, here's the small group instruction we're going to give you. We're again assuming everybody needs support because of this year and what we've been through. So we have adopted highly qualified instructional materials that that have been vetted through the Delaware Department of Education. This is in ELA and math for the entire district. The elementary had already adopted a highly qualified math curriculum. So this is ELA for elementary, ELA and math for our secondary schools. We have additional instructional coaches. We are taking our curriculum specialists through lots of training. Our directors are doing training. We are delivering that to teachers. We're paying teachers to come after school to learn. We're paying teachers before school to learn. So we've really re-engineered the entire teaching and learning department and our goals because of what we've been through and what we know the end goal.
From what I know, the districts here in the state always go above and beyond for their students. But when it comes down to, it's all about the numbers, right? So were there standardized testings that occurred earlier this year when students returned?
There are assessments. I would call them interim or benchmark assessments. Okay. The standardized are given in the spring. So yeah, but we do have a universal screener we use in our district, which is called iReady. Our elementary schools have additional assessments. Our secondary schools have other course assessments and beginning of the year assessments. So we have those. Teachers are currently triangulating all of that data, again, to add to that triangle about who needs what and making sure that they get it.
So if you can, how do those assessments look? Are you seeing this big gap from students and you're saying, oh, we have some work to do? Or are you saying, oh, there's not much of a delta there? Everyone did their homework, right? So, but what are we seeing? And what type of remedies, if we're seeing something negative, would you suggest?
We do see that there's a need.
Okay.
We also found a very interesting fact that our kindergartners did remarkably well while they were at home. And now that we have them as first graders this fall, we are noticing a little delta there in some of the scores. And you know what that means? Parents were home helping kids, and that's exactly what we wanted. Yeah. But we also know the moves we need to make, right, in the classroom to make sure that kids are able to do what we need them to do on their own. So we're looking at that data. We're, again, developing small group instruction, really applying that lens during an intervention block, making sure everybody has this intervention block, we call it, from K to 12. And it's sort of a new phenomenon for our secondary schools, but making sure that remediation is happening where it needs to happen, the reteaching is happening where it needs to happen, and enrichment. Listen, we've got kids who've been talented and gifted throughout their school careers, and we need to make sure they continue to get that, whether it's remote or face-to-face.
I was going to say, if I could just add to that, yeah. From the secondary level, or just from the building leader level, I think that contrary to what a lot of people believe, I know COVID did create some hardships for some of our students, but it also increased our teaching capacity, right? So our teachers are now better prepared to meet the needs of our students. It's required them to step out of their comfort zone. It's required them to get more professional development. It's required them to meet students a little bit more as to where they are. The more of the technological age that we were so afraid of, we are no longer afraid of, and we realize that we have to do this to be able to engage our students. So it's been helpful in a sense, and it's also something that we look forward to, because now, again, we can just do a lot of things differently, and we're better prepared for the future as well.
I think that's awesome. Now, there were several students, and you both would understand this, that were on the margin prior to, due to socioeconomic status, various reasons that I can't imagine. But there were a lot of kids in Christina that needed help prior to COVID. COVID was not the help that they needed, right? So what are you finding as a challenge to re-engage those students? And I fear that those are the ones that may have dropped off, right? They may have had some technical issues. They may not have had the Wi-Fi necessary. I know there was plenty of initiatives to get laptops out to students and all these other things, but a lot of these students were transient in nature prior to COVID, right? So then COVID hits and it's just a whole nother thing. So what are you finding? And the second part to that question is there a psychological part of those students coming back, right? Are they just not students anymore? Because for some of them, they may have lived on their own. They may have been out there, and now you want me to be a student again? And I would think you would see a lot of that in the high school and maybe in the junior highs. But are you experiencing that, and how are you dealing with it?
I can talk about some of the plans we put in place, and maybe you could talk about how it's working at the school level. It was really important for us to put these care teams on the ground, and that care teams, I really think that's an acronym. It's a Delaware term, but I really adopted it. So a care team is just that, a group of individuals that can get on the ground and wrap their arms around kids and find out what your needs are and then rapidly address them. So every school in Christina School District starting this year has a social worker. Okay. Some of those schools even have a family crisis therapist. So that's like having two social workers in one. The elementary counselors were contracted out before. This year they became full-time district employees so that we can elevate that position and get those folks in there doing the really critical tasks we need them to do. We also help, some of our secondary schools have behavioral health consultants, we have behavior interventionists, we've got a plethora of support staff on the ground this year that we've never had before to really investigate those needs and then get in there and address them.
Right. And I absolutely agree. These resources that we didn't have previously are definitely a benefit to the schools because it allows the teachers to teach and not be all of those other positions and all those other people to be able to support our students. So when you have someone constantly coming to the home or calling or really just having those conversations, those one-on-one conversations, just figuring out what it is that's going on in their lives, you're in a better position to be able to support them. And so to answer your question about those who may have been transient or lost, the first and most important thing is to get them in the seats, right? So get them into the school. And when they get into the school, you need to show them that there is opportunity for you. There is an opportunity for you to continue your education. We have teachers and people in positions now that are accelerating their learning so that they don't feel like it. Because at the high school, if you're a 10th grader and you kind of fell off, in your mind, you're thinking I have to make up another entire year. So now I'm going to spend 5 years in high school, right? Nobody wants to spend 5 years in high school. So what we do is we figure out opportunities for them to be able to do that, credit recovery opportunities, after school tutoring opportunities, putting them in the correct courses that are going to align for them to be able to graduate on time because they want to graduate and they want to be out. So that's critically important for them also.
I'm glad he mentioned that. I'm sorry, because tutoring is really important. And you asked a question earlier about what were we doing about or what guarantees we had that instruction or learning was being addressed. Forgot to mention that every student in Christina School District who wants a tutor gets a tutor, paid for out of my office. We've partnered with 4 tutoring agencies in the area, and that's a process that's ongoing. It was last year, this summer, and will continue. And then when you talked about the credit recovery and the kids that are working and the Twilight programs we have, and then the partnership we developed with our Adult Education Grows program where these kids can go to school really any time of day or night. So we wanted to make sure we named that.
So there's a couple things and that I want to cover before we end here. First thing is what you're doing is great, but are you comfortable in saying that every district in the state has some initiative similar to this to re-engage students? Because the agenda watchers are all throughout the state, right? So I don't want them to think that this is just a Christina thing. This is throughout the state. All districts are trying to re-engage, okay? The second thing, I believe in consequences, all right? I think that when we're a society without consequences, we're in trouble, right? So for the students that have not re-engaged and their parents are not pushing them to re-engage, I remember truancy issues. What are we doing? Is that still a thing? Are there consequences to lack of re-engagement or what is it?
Well, at the district level, again, remember we talked about the support team being on the ground there. So we are really, our stance is that let's try an intervention approach first and see what the reason is for the absence or the extended absence. And then yes, if need be, truancy efforts will be put in place. Accountability is a thing this year.
Okay, and how do you all feel about that?
I feel that we need to be careful, right? So we don't want to just automatically apply consequences to students without understanding where they are and what their situation is. Now, if there's not a legit reason as to why they're not attending, then of course, we'll make every effort to try to re-engage them and support them. And then of course, consequences do happen, right? But we don't want to be presumptuous and just believe that you're just not showing up just because you don't want to come to school or you don't want to engage. We really want to understand what those issues are. But I'm happy with the process, if that was what your initial question was.
Yeah, and I
like
really
how,
want
right.
to know, and parents want to know, right? Because there's going to be parents here that are watching that are still on the fence, right? There may be some child that has not re-engaged and they're with their guardian or parent, and they want to know, what does my principal think? Am I going to get in trouble if I go back? Are they going to lock me up if I don't take this boy back to school? People want to know those questions. So, I can't thank either one of you enough for everything that you're doing. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, to the agenda's attention. And if there's anything that we can do to help support this effort, please let us know.
Auto accident, medical negligence, work injury. Contact Team Tice, your Delaware personal injury lawyers. Leroy Tice in Wilmington, Delaware, serving and supporting the people of Delaware. Call 302-489-2400. That's 302-489-2400. Online at teamtice.com.
In the midst of one of the swiftest and most abrupt expulsions of refugees from the country, the U.S. has begun flying some 12,000 Haitian refugees that were detained in Texas, in the border town of Del Rio. In just 9 days, the U.S. has deported some 4,000 immigrants as part of this deportation blitz. The immigrants at the border face an ultimatum. Return to Haiti or face an uncertain future. Emigration from the island country is spurred by a history fraught by natural disaster, economic strain, and brutal dictatorships. Haiti in the 1700s was bolstered into a position of economic supremacy on the backs of slaves. After 30 years of bloody fighting and devastating waves of yellow fever, the former French colony of Saint-Domingue was declared the Free Republic of Haiti, becoming the first independent nation in Latin America, the first post-colonial independent black nation in the world, and the only nation whose independence was gained through the successful slave rebellion. Yet, after years of fighting, the former agricultural land was decimated, leaving the new nation without an economy and facing the tremendous feat of reconstruction. To learn more about what these refugees face as they search for a better life, we spoke with Dr. Kaliche Lawrence of the Delaware African and Caribbean Affairs Commission and Jean Milfort, who recently returned from the country. And we would like to welcome you to the agenda to talk about issues in regards to Haiti and kind of what's going on. Now, excuse me, Dr. Lawrence, Jean, you just got back from Haiti, correct?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
That was a very short visit. At first, I left my family here and my business was still under operation. But I just wanted to go myself, see what's going on the ground.
Of course.
But I've been here for the last 20 years and my heart is still connected to the country. And most of my family members, my siblings are still in the country. Even they have the capability of coming and go, but they wanted to stay there. And of course, we did not get hate from where we live, but this part of the country is very important to me historically.
Right.
So I took the trip just to see myself what's need to get done.
Yeah.
And what's the reality.
What part of Haiti was this?
It was in Okai.
Okay.
Most likely in the deep south of Haiti.
Now, I understand that the lineage of Haiti, and I know that there is a strong African ties here, but how does your organization tie in with the Haitian effort that's going on now?
Absolutely, and that's an excellent question, because if you look at the name, the Delaware African and Caribbean Affairs Commission, so the goal really is to promote the interests of all people of African descent. And the Haitians also are people of African descent. So you have continental Africans like myself, originally from Nigeria. You have our Caribbean brothers and sisters from the Caribbean. And of course, you have our African American brothers and sisters who happen to be here, through the activities of history. They are all people of African descent, and they are all represented at the commission.
So now Haiti has had a very rough decade almost, but especially now over the past few months. Their president was assassinated, as you well know. We're also dealing with another earthquake that has hit the area that hasn't even recovered fully from the previous earthquake. I think that's fair to say. And we had a hurricane basically blast through part of the island as well. People have fled the country, and this isn't something new, right? I think more than likely the trip from Chile is that where most people go to and begin to work their way up through South America to gain entry into the United States. Do you think that those Haitian refugees under the bridge in Del Rio, Texas, should gain asylum here in the United States or be afforded an opportunity to gain asylum in the United States? Or do you believe that just like all the other immigrants that are trying to come into this country, there are proper channels, there are proper steps that you have to go through?
So I'm going to speak very quickly on this, and then I'm going to defer, of course, to Jean, because under the circumstances, he's definitely the expert in that about Haitian refugees, for that matter. But what I know about immigration and the things that motivate people, immigration should be controlled, right? There should be proper channels and processes for processing people into this country, clearly. And I believe those channels do exist. Now, how they are applied and whether they are applied fairly and consistently, I don't know. But I do believe that there needs to be a process for certainly getting people in and out of this country.
How did they get here at first? And some of the countries, they should be accountable for this, because the route, from the Latin countries, the way they get there is very interesting.
Was I correct when I was speaking of the trek from South America, maybe even Chile, where they begin that trek and work their way up south through South America?
You are very correct. You are very correct. By my investigation, those people, every country that they step in, they have to pay so much money.
Right.
What about the government? Do they know what's going on? I'm pretty sure they know.
Right.
So let's put this aside.
Yeah.
Well, the Haitian right now, what they're going through in their country, pretty much they don't have a country anymore. We can literally say that we don't have a country. To have a country, it's like you have a brand new car. The engine is running, the AC is working, the heat is working. But at this point, there's nothing is working in this country. According to my last trip, my phone calls, my investigation, nothing is working. And those folks going back home, they don't even know if they're gonna make it to the doorstep.
Right.
They're not quite sure.
So why don't they stay in Chile? Why wouldn't you just say, oh, you know what, I made it this far? The Chilean government, although with their own issues, is a lot better than what I have in Haiti. So why not stop the trek there? Why am I going to risk my family going up through South America, through some very dangerous countries, through some very dangerous terrain, with literally no money in my pocket, and then I'm going to come here? Is the thought of America that great?
Oh, most definitely. My last trip in China, when I got there, the way they think about the United States, of course, we are the best nation on earth. But to come from the United States, you must come in from the heaven. So the mentality is all across the world. So the Haitian thinks about the same way. But like I said, from the beginning of the topic, they didn't do it alone. It is a business. From what I understand, it is a business. We will take you to the United States. We have the way, we have the map. This is how much you're gonna pay. We're gonna take you from this country to that country. You're gonna stop there and here and there. We will let you here.
So they almost purchase a ticket, some sort of a ticket or a guarantee of service to come to this country.
Exactly.
Now, not to jump subjects, let me ask you a question. Ballpark, we have about 2,000 people over the past week or two that are being exiled back to Haiti. You made it very clear and spoke very, very eloquently about there not being a Haiti to return to from a government standpoint. It may say Haiti on the map, but it isn't the Haiti that you know. So what are they returning to? What do you assume that their lives will be once they return? Is there going to be a consequence for running away?
No, there is no consequence at all. Haiti is pretty much a free country like any other democratic country. But the thing is, most of those people, they sold their land, they sold their home, they sold everything that they had to get here, or even to any other country that they came from.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to start life all over again. And they don't even know how they're gonna start. So pretty much coming from under a bridge and going back under another bridge. So the Haitian government, do they have the capability to support those people? No, they don't, because there is no unified government. There is not a system in place to support those people. So, and send them back home without a stable government, I think it's crucial.
My opinion, we have to remember that we are Americans. A lot of us like to throw that term around where I'm an American and I've earned my right to be here. Well, you've earned your right to be here on the backs of your forefathers. And I can almost guarantee that none of them were American. They were just like these Haitian refugees, coming from a land for whatever reason. Some of that was religious persecution. Some of that was in search of a better life. The same exact reason why they're down there now. So how do we treat those people? People that have been just gone through horrible, horrible circumstances. They've had issues with politics, where if they weren't Democrat or Republican, imagine that, you would be killed. The president was murdered. And right about the time you start dealing with that, an earthquake occurs. And you lose so much of your family. And then right after that, a hurricane occurs. And you lose so much of your family. So what do? You go and you try to enter a country to have a chance. I say all that to say, let's love one another. Let's look out for one another. And if anything, we can do better than what we're doing. I look forward to seeing you again next week on The Agenda.